united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?
Very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rory O'Neill, and I'm a health reporter at Politico. And you are watching Politico Live, which is the live extension of our non-partisan journalism. So we're coming to you this afternoon from our headquarters in Brussels for a discussion on Europe's intellectual property system. So what we're going to do is a panel discussion to try and find out if the EU's IP system effectively incentivizes innovation while ensuring timely patient access. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our partner Sandoz for making this event possible, and we're also going to encourage you to participate, so feel free to discuss the event on social media using the hashtag PharmaPatentsEU. And so before we start our event, I'm going to hand over to Julia Pike. She is the Global Head of IP at Sandoz, and she's going to make some introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Rory, and thank you everybody here in the room for joining us today. It's lovely to have real people to speak to in a virtual event. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Sandoz. Preparing for today was a little bit of a challenge. Patent practice in the life sciences area is so niche that even other lawyers complain that we cannot possibly be understood. So today I risk both frustrating my fellow practitioners with my generalities, while perhaps confusing some others with my specificities. So bear with me, I will do my best to make sure that our perspective here is clear. So no one would disagree that pharmaceutical innovation has changed life as we know it. Medicines can change a terminal disease into a long, healthy life, and they can take what was once a debilitating disease and make it a manageable condition. No one would disagree that pharmaceutical innovation and pharmaceutical research and development can be expensive and time-consuming, although there is some debate about exactly how expensive. But nor would anyone disagree that medicines becoming available at less than half the price for more than twice the patients is also something that our healthcare systems should aspire to. Today, we ask the question, does the European patent system strike the right balance between innovation and competition? It's a truth somewhat universally acknowledged that patents play an essential role in rewarding innovation. By creating a time period during which it is guaranteed that a product will face no competition, patents create important certainty for investors that they will see a return. Now, the most important patents in life sciences are those patents that cover the active pharmaceutical ingredient in a product. Take, for example, aspirin in the pill you take when you've perhaps drunk a little too much the day before. While that patent exists, and we call that kind of patent a primary patent, no one else can make a medicine using that ingredient. It's the expiration of those primary patents that companies use to make decisions about how and when to invest. And it's the expiration of those primary patents that determine when generic and biosimilar competition is possible. Now, Europe has already done more than anywhere else in the world to support pharmaceutical innovation by making sure those primary patent protections run for 15 plus years. But a 2024 study showed that 91% of oncology products approved in Europe between 2015 and 2020 had recouped their estimated R&D costs by just year 8 after launch. So isn't 15 plus years enough? When those primary patents expire, generic and biosimilar companies should be able to bring competition to market. The effect of that competition is an immediate reduction in the cost of that medicine and an increase in the number of patients who can receive that medicine, sometimes by as much as double. Now, if that were the end of the story, this would be a very dull debate. Because the imbalance that Sandoz experiences in the European patent system is not created by that 15+ year period of exclusivity. It arises from the acquisition of multiple additional patents that expire later than that primary patent, we'll call them secondary patents, and the strategic way those secondary patents are used to delay generic and biosimilar competition. So let me share some data on those secondary patents and how they create imbalances. It's those secondary patents that are being gamed to maximise the patent risk, cost, and uncertainty faced by generic and biosimilar companies. One example some of you may be aware of, and you may hear a little bit more about today, is the divisional game. It costs less than $250,000 to obtain a patent at the European Patent Office, but a generic company looking to revoke that patent across Europe could spend as much as $15 million. And in the leading 4 EU countries, in just the last 5 years, the estimated costs to generics and biosimilars of patent litigation on those secondary patents was around $250 million. But here's the real problem. Only around 15% of those secondary patents, when challenged at the European Patent Office, survive that challenge. That means 85%, more than 4 in 5, should never have been granted in the first place. And yet every one of them can be used as a means to delay competition, increase costs, and restrict access. At its best, the patent system fuels innovation and brings life-saving medicines to patients. At its worst, it slows access, burns resources on burns resources on patent battles for patents that should never have been granted. That balance isn't theoretical. It's measured in lives, in budgets, in missed opportunities. And right now, the scales are tipped a little too far in the wrong way. So with that hopefully thought-provoking perspective, I look forward to watching the interaction between our panellists, and I hand back to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Julia. So the first part of our event today will be an Oxford-style debate with 2 speakers on opposing sides. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to vote for or against the motion we're going to be discussing today. So the motion is, this House believes that the EU's intellectual property system strikes the right balance between incentives for medicines innovation and patient access. So you can scan the QR code displayed on the room or on your screens, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to vote before I introduce our speakers. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the rules of the debate very quickly. So we're going to have 2 teams, one arguing in favour and one against the motion. So I'll give it to you once more. This House believes that the EU's intellectual property system strikes the right balance between incentives for medicines innovation and patient access. So we're going to start with 3 minutes of opening arguments from each of our speakers, followed by a quick panel discussion with 2 additional experts. Afterwards, we will hear the closing arguments from the same speakers who opened the debate, and they will have 90 seconds right after the panel to conclude. Our speakers will be MEP Tomislav Sokol, a member of the Sant and IMCO committees and a substitute member of the ENVI committee. He will be proposing the motion. And on the opposing side, we will have Yanis Natsis, Director of the European Social Insurance Platform. So I'd like to ask you to give a very generous round of applause to our speakers as they join us on stage.
Okay. Good to see you.
You're both very welcome. Thank you for joining me. So you're both going to have 180 seconds exactly to make your point. And I will invite MEP Tomislav Sokol to open the debate by proposing the motion for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we know we have a lot of data which shows us that definitely without intellectual property protection, without regulatory data protection, there will be no new medicines, no innovative medicines, no state-of-the-art treatment for patients. So I think that's the bottom line. It takes around 1 billion euros to create a new medicine, to develop new medicines. Not to mention the fact that there is a big risk because most of the molecules, much bigger number is the ones that fail than those who succeed. And obviously, if we want to have an incentive to develop new medicines to tackle that risk, we need regulatory data protection and we need intellectual property protection. When we speak about European Union, of course, we have to speak about European Union in the global setting. We are in global competition. The data shows us that we are lagging behind the US. We've been lagging behind the US in terms of innovation for the last 20 years. On one side, on the other side, China is decreasing the distance between us and them, which means that definitely in terms of competitiveness, in terms of competing with the others, we need to have a strong system of incentives. Any kind of decrease of the system will definitely not work. When we speak about access, we have to also realize that defining access to healthcare is primarily a national competence. So it is stated by Article 168 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union that organization, management, financing, allocation of resources in the healthcare system is a national competence. So EU has definitely very limited role to play there. We have the legislation, which is, for instance, Transparency Directive from 1989, which determines the conditions and deadlines for making pricing and reimbursement decisions, so that medicines get to the patient as soon as possible. Obviously, we have the general pharmaceutical legislation, which regulates the possibilities for medicines to get to the common European market, and for those patients who cannot get adequate healthcare treatment in their own home country, for instance, for rare diseases, we have a Social Security Coordination Regulation, we have Cross-Border Healthcare Directive, which make it possible for them to get healthcare abroad, which is covered by their health insurance. Of course, if the certain conditions are met. So to sum up, in a situation where we have limited competencies on the EU level, where we have fragmentation because of the division of competences on healthcare between the EU and the member states, and we have to compete globally, the system that we have is maybe not perfect, but definitely is the one that is striking the right balance. It's making sure that innovation is stimulated, is incentivized, and definitely any idea of decreasing these incentives on behalf of access first would not work, would decrease our competitiveness and make more of industrial investments of pharmaceutical industry going outside of Europe, and the end result would be less access to patients, not more.
180 seconds exactly. Thank you very much. And Yanis, let's see if you can do.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The motion today invites us to consider the role of IP in pharmaceutical innovation. My argument is not that IP has no place. Clearly it does, and I agree with MEP Sokol. But the current framework of patents and exclusivities, it is obvious that it is not optimally serving the public interest, nor is a win-win situation. Firstly, while IP was designed to incentivize innovation, incentivize risk-taking, what we actually see today is the accumulation of layered, overlapping protections, patents, supplementary protection certificates, market exclusivity, data exclusivity, the orphan drug status, to name but a few. Altogether, what do? They drive up prices and they delay competition, far beyond, as we heard from Julia, what is necessary to reward innovation. Some medicines in Europe remain protected, as we heard, from generic entry for 15+ years. This is structural overprotection. Companies engage in strategic patenting to delay competition, including minor reformulations, commonly referred to as evergreening. Speaking of evergreening, ladies and gentlemen, let me draw your attention to this familiar image. This is the Ever Given, the container ship that famously got wedged in the Suez Canal in 2021, blocking one of the world's most critical trade routes for days. We all remember the frustration. Nothing could move forward, and the backlog rippled across the globe. Now, in pharmaceutical regulation, we have our own version of this kind of blockage, like it is a ship, and it's called evergreening, as you can see actually here. I didn't do it, this is the real actual picture. Like this ship, patent extensions, divisional patents, secondary patents, supplementary certificates, SPCs, and data exclusivities pile up one after the other, as you can see, creating multiple artificial bottlenecks. These are not signs of continued innovation. They are legal, very expensive, as we heard from Julia, legal maneuvers designed to delay competition, prolong market dominance, and, of course, serve the profits of the companies. Like the Ever Given, the boat, the ship, they block the passage of affordable medicines, not by accident, but by design. And just as in the Suez Canal, the downstream consequences are significant. Delayed access, inflated costs, an innovation pipeline that rewards protection over progress. Secondly, EU and national programs de-risk much of the early, and not only the early, scientific work. The public sector takes on substantial risk. Thirdly, the current model does not reliably align innovation with public health needs. We see overinvestment in certain areas and underinvestment in certain areas like antibiotics, vaccines, pediatric formulations. This is a market failure and the structural consequence of a model that rewards market size. It does not reward public nor stakeholder value, but only shareholder value. And perhaps I can conclude by saying that the European Commission itself has acknowledged these imbalances by proposing the reform of the pharmaceutical legislation. Why? Because perhaps we need to consider that today we have far more carrots than actual sticks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you both very much for setting the scene for us. We are going to move on to our panel discussion with 2 additional speakers. Thank you. So, a very big welcome to our distinguished speakers joining us for this part of the event. Sitting just beside me, we have MEP Marta Temido from the S&D Group. She's a member of the European Parliament Subcommittee on Human Rights, Vice Chair, in fact, and a member of the ENVI Committee, substitute member of the Sant Committee. Joining me on the far side of the room, we have Roya Gafelli, Director of Oxfirst. So you're both very welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I should give you the results of our poll. This was before the speakers spoke. So the motion, this House believes that the EU's intellectual property system strikes the right balance between incentives for medicines innovation and patient access. Latest figure I have, 24% think it does, 76% say no, it doesn't. But that was before our debate began, so don't let it go to your head, Yanis. We're going to see how it looks at the very end. So we heard 2 very compelling opening statements from our debaters there. I'd like to ask the 2 additional panelists joining us. Can I just start by, Marta, I'll start with yourself, you're right beside me. Can I just ask by getting your reaction to the opening statements we heard there? MEP Sokol says we strike the right balance, that strong IP rights are essential for incentivizing innovation. We heard from Yanis Natsis that we have structural blockage in the system, and very powerfully illustrated by the Evergreen ship there. Where do you stand on this debate? What do you think of what we've heard so far?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's not easy to stand at this debate. I think that we must all be aware that the geopolitical situation has changed, and Europe must respond to these changes. And how this disconnects with pharmaceutical sector. The pharmaceutical sector, and especially the current incentive framework, needs to adapt. Moving into a regulatory model that promotes research and innovation, but European research and innovation, while ensuring access to medicines. So I don't see a conflict between those 2 rights, the right to intellectual property and the right to public health. I see attention, and I think that the role of European Parliament, the European institutions of member states, is to deal with that tension. And we can deal with that tension that is not a conflict, because I think that we need to achieve to some cooperation between those two rights, considering a new regulatory model that is not regarding the patient part of it, but the secondary patents. And there we need to modulate the incentives. We need to modulate the incentives because the sticks and carrots that you mentioned before, we need to use the carrots to reimburse, to incentivize what we want to have. And what we want to have? We want to have more innovation, European innovation, and more access from patients. So we think that we could decrease the main protection level, the secondary protection level, but with complementary leverage from other aspects, orphan drugs, antimicrobial resistance products, incentives to European development, clinical trials, etc. This is the way we think that we can deal with the situation.
Super. Okay, thank you. There's lots I would like to ask yourself and our fellow panelists about there. Before we continue the discussion, Roy, I just want to ask you, can you give us your perspective on what we've heard so far?
Thank you very much. I'm above all extremely excited that patents are finally being politicized. I have lived 25 years a life where people are saying, what on earth are you really doing? You should be speaking with some other tech nerds who try to understand what on earth some technology can or cannot do, and then we patent it and nobody afterwards even understands what is in the patent. So I think politicizing intellectual property is a very important thing to do. And why is it important? It's important because patents are the legal rights to technology and innovation. What the patent system does is that it introduces private property over knowledge and ideas. And that is extremely powerful. This is the next level of capitalism, for better or for worse. And depending on what governance structures we are setting for our intellectual property, we'll see either access or opportunities for business, or both together, and that would be my ideal scenario. But if we are not politicizing intellectual property, we're not going to see anything, because we'll still be talking about the tangible assets of the world and how to have access to chairs. So I think having such a distinct panel here today to even talk about it, I'm really happy about it. I know my patent lawyers, the patent offices, we're all in our own little silo community, and hardly does anyone ever care that we actually exist. So then on the other, what I would like to say to this specific debate is that I think these were two excellent opening statements. I also think that this is an extreme next question, and this will not be a matter of saying one person is right or the other person is right, because the devil lies in the detail, and there are a lot of issues with patent quality and what type of patents are being issued by the patent offices. And it's kind of like a weird situation where actually you only know if you have something or not once you went to court. So that the patent is actually like Schrödinger's cat. You could have a patent, but maybe you don't. We don't really know until we test the waters. That's not really helpful to build the knowledge-based economy, but it's a really hard thing to crack, because no government is going to spend so much money on hiring as many patent examiners in the planet to just make sure we really have only issued patents that fly and that really withhold the strength of challenging them. So the probabilistic patent system is adventurous, but I also see that without any protection for private property rights, nobody's going to give a toss to actually bother with it, probably. I said that once to the music industry, said, well, we do it for sex and rock and roll. I'm not sure this would hold for the pharma industry.
Well,
do you?
Well, let's see. So, I mean, why do we need...
Let's see.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you about. So, I'll ask this to all four of you. I'll start beside me and we'll go around. So, why do we need strong legal monopolies? to incentivize innovation? And are there alternative models we could explore? So the Public Pharma for Europe Coalition, a group of NGOs, argues that we should expand public pharmaceutical infrastructure, including R&D. Pharmaceutical companies benefit a great deal from public money in research and development already. So why do they need such strong exclusivity rights to convert that research into private profit? Marta, what do you think?
I think that this is not the right approach. I really think that, of course, that we need to protect intellectual rights. We have legal frameworks for that. We have the patents regime. We have the legislation on pharmaceutical products in European Union. And this already gives protection to innovation. The question is that the assessments that the European Commission has made show that we have incentives that are not efficient. They are generous if comparing with other countries. We cannot forget about that. We cannot forget that the problem regarding incentivizing innovation in Europe is not that one, because all studies show that United States system, Switzerland system, Israeli system is even more strict than ours. The problem is how we use incentives. And this is why I think that we need to modulate. And we need to modulate because everybody knows that when we deal with the incentives system, you need to modulate it in order to have to achieve the goals that you intend. This is a part of it. The other part of it is regarding the aspects of pricing and reimbursement. That is a competition of member states. And the question regarding prices and reimbursement, that is the other side of the perhaps the not so visible side of this discussion, is that we need to increase the cooperation in these systems. Of course, that is a competence of member states, but without having this challenge as a common challenge, we are not going to progress.
Tomislav, what do you think are private incentives for pharma companies inefficient? Is it time to reimagine pharma R&D as a public endeavor, or is the system we have at the moment working just fine?
Are we still advocating for our statements from the beginning, or can we be more flexible?
You can elaborate from your.
So let's put it like this. So in principle, in general, I agree with the proposing statement, but I think also there are some things that could be adjusted. Let's put it like this. So first, I agree on the modulation. So I think when you speak about modulation, modulation is necessary to some extent. I think that we should really focus on key priority areas. Now, with the whole situation with global relations and US, I think that also stimulating production in Europe should be part of it. I was saying that when I was negotiating on the pharma legislation. So that's definitely true. I think that in principle we need the system because first there is big risk. So as we said, the big majority of molecules do not end up to recoup the investment. It usually takes very long time, so sometimes intellectual property protection can expire. This is why we need regulatory data protection on top to make sure that once a market exclusivity, then once the medicine gets on the market, they are guaranteed that they will recoup the investment. And this security and certainty is necessary. When you make business plans, you cannot base everything on modulation, especially if you depend on external factors. For instance, if you will get additional 6 months or 1 year of RDP, depending on whether the member state has made the pricing and reimbursement decision in time or not. So definitely, I think that there is part that needs to be guaranteed. That this is essential. This legal certainty is essential for companies to make a business plan, investment plans, etc. We have to take into account the risk and the time that it takes for a new molecule to be developed. And I don't think that all of this can be just shifted to public spending. I mean, you need private motivation. You need profit as a motive. I mean, let's be honest. So that's a very strong motive. I come from a former communist country, so we tried to have everything public, and it really didn't work. So definitely, I think we need private investments. Of course, part of it, especially basic research, will always be done through public funds. This is why we need to protect the Horizon program, which is now being challenged. There are ideas to completely absorb it into this competitiveness fund that I'm against. So definitely there needs to be a combination. So strong basic research to a large extent supported by public funding, but then when you get to the point of commercialization, we need to create a system of incentives to recoup the risk, to recoup the time that takes to develop new medicine. I think that this has to be done through private investments, and of course we need to support it, also taking into account the global competition. Definitely we cannot look at this whole situation in a vacuum, because if there are others who have different other ways to stimulate innovation, their investments, maybe not with longer regulatory data protection, but with less bureaucracy, with faster procedures of approval, etc. So we have to compete with what we have. And I think also taking into account that we have 27 national systems, and all of these differences also lead to delays in access for patients to medicines. I think the system of incentives, of RDP, etc., is definitely the best way to go. I don't think that anybody has come up with something better. And on antibiotics, just one point to refer to what my opponent was saying. I think antibiotics precisely show that we need stronger incentives, not weaker ones, because there we have market failure and we need to provide incentives to invest. So I think kind of what you said about antibiotics actually is the argument more in my favor than yours.
So a part of my job here is I'm on Jargon Watch today. So RDP, that's regulatory data protection. That's the period of exclusivity that companies get during which competitors can't access their product data. We'll hopefully talk more about the pharma package, where that's a very big deal, in just a moment. But Yanis, we need the profit incentive. Can we afford to undercut the competitiveness of the European pharma industry?
I would like to bring in the elephant in the room, which is also the prices of medicines, and that is a very big deal. We, within ESIP and our members, who are the big public statutory healthcare payers, we have national data that nobody can dispute that shows that we have a systemic problem with unaffordable prices. And therefore, now, especially nowadays that we have all of these competing national priorities, we need to be very careful about what we do with this investment. And of course, all of these exclusivities, patents and others that I referred to, they come at a very high price. And we need to be aware of the fact that the longer those periods are, the more the prices will be driven upwards. And not only that, but it also limits our capacity to negotiate effectively. Because what can you expect from a monopolist? From a monopolist, you can expect that there will be a scarcity in supply, but also raising the prices. And this is what we see. And this is, for us, extremely important, because the sustainability of the overall system is at stake. Therefore, of course, we are also in favor of strengthening Europe's competitiveness. We want to have jobs in Europe. We want to have growth in the continent. At the same time, we need to be very careful. We need to have this investment being done in an evidence-based way, because, of course, companies, and rightly so, they will use this momentum, especially in light of the global trade wars, to come up with their own wish lists. But these are expensive wish lists. Therefore, it is important, especially for us, we don't only look at the healthcare budget, but we also look at what's going on with pensions. We're also looking at what's going on with other benefits. So the pot of the honey is quite small, and we see an attempt that everyone is trying to put all their fingers in this small pot of honey. Therefore, let's just be careful, because, of course, on paper, when we negotiate legislation, and speaking of legislation, in Europe, we've been very generous. The European legislators for the past 25 years have granted fantastic perks and benefits to the companies. Therefore, let's just put things into perspective, because as Marta Temido said, we have already a very healthy ecosystem of incentives in Europe that for the past 25 years has kind of given us some fantastic innovation, but also made the life of companies easier in Europe.
Roy, what do you think? Is life too easy for pharma companies in Europe?
I think we need to dive deeper into the substance of the question. It has no point in debating whether we should abolish the patent system. It's not going to happen. And we should not be debating, should we have more left-wing or more right-wing direction towards in Europe, because that's also outside, that's too big as a question. We should really push really into what is the core of the question. And there I'm seeing that there's simply not an awful lot close to zero economic evidence even of the potential economic ramifications of what is currently being proposed. I have reviewed the situation and I have only seen a very superficially undertaken study, and that is it. And I think in the era of economic-based evidence, there would be really a need for more substance to understand what could be the prospect of this regulation, what could be the effects of it specifically on shortening or lengthening data protection, of reviewing the SPC regime, of looking at compulsory licensing. We don't have the evidence. So I think that would be really important before we make any rush into any decisions to have really solid economic evidence.
Marta, competitiveness is one of the Commission's top political priorities this mandate, shared by plenty of member states, also building from the Draghi report last September. We've heard the arguments. The originator pharma industry that develops new drugs, they say that this system is exactly what we need to retain the competitiveness of European industry at a crucial time. Do you think, how do we expand access to medicines, lower drug prices without significantly undermining the competitiveness of European pharma companies? Or are these exactly the kind of trade-offs we need to make to expand access to drugs?
Well, first of all, allow me to say that I fully agree with what has been said, because the first time I deep dive into this discussion, something that scared me a lot was the baseline that we were all discussing about 8 years, 6 years, 7.5 years, 8.5 years. And I was completely disturbed because there was no rationale about that, or if there is a rationale about that, I didn't found it in the assessment impacts. So this is important because we are all discussing and trying to do our best to combine innovation and competitiveness in Europe and access for patients, and we have a lack of evidence for our policies that we are trying to develop. But the second question that you mentioned, the price and reimbursement question and the Draghi report proposals, is also very important, because the Draghi report targets that point, and the recommendation of the Draghi report regarding this issue is, in my perspective, from my reading perspective, especially focused on pricing and reimbursement, and on pushing for more cooperation systems in that area, because of course that incentivizing innovation is important, increasing access, lowering prices, having more access to generics is very important, but we cannot forget that after that we have 27 member states, different procedures for pricing and reimbursement. And we cannot change that because this is in the treaties, as my colleague Stanislav mentioned before. But we can improve our procedures. We can have learn from some practical experiences. And for instance, we discuss joint procurement, but we never discuss joint pricing or joint reimbursement. And we could at least have learned from the experiences in Benelux, etc., in buying together, in fixing, having discussions about pricing together.
We've talked a lot about the pharma package. As we covered in our morning health newsletter this morning, the Polish presidency wants to have a compromise proposal. The Council's negotiating its position at the moment, and the Polish presidency wants to have a compromise proposal on the table for mid-May. An ambitious timeline, but that means I think they're aiming for trilogues to begin soon. We've talked about one of the biggest sticking points, the appropriate period of RDP that companies should have. But can what's at stake in this trilogue, which could begin very shortly? What are the stakes, and how far do you think the Parliament should be willing to go in this position?
I mean, it's very hard to speak about something that we still don't have, that we don't know. That's the council position. I think definitely the main point of contention is on the question of incentives and access, because so we have the part on incentives, so RDP, whether it will be 6, 7, 8 years, etc., market exclusivity, but also the question on the tying incentives with putting product on all 27 national markets. And here I think there is a division, I think probably between Eastern and Western member states, not completely, but to a large extent, because also we need to take into account one part of the industry, that is the generic industry. So from the Eastern Europe's point of view, so you have the question that they want to reduce prices because they have less financial capabilities to pay than most Western countries, and they have stronger generic industry, so which is also connected, because if you get generic products sooner to the market, then you pay less price, obviously. There's less pressure on your budget. So that's the question of finding the balance. What the parliament proposed is to reduce, essentially, as I said, protect the baseline as a certainty, as the basis for future, as the basis for making business plans, etc. I agree that we lack economic evidence and data, etc., on the effects of this. I can also agree on that. But that was one part. But we also wanted to make sure that generic medicines get to the market right away after the protection expires, and this is why we went with a strong so-called BOLAR exemption, to make sure that they are already developed while the protection is ongoing, so that when it ends, they're already ready to get to the market. Of course, there are some problems of tying this with pricing and reimbursement, because then what can happen is that products really get sooner on the market than it's legal, but there are ways how to tackle this. I will not get into details. So I think that's the crucial question. On access, the problem with the tying incentives with access is that essentially how it was defined in the Commission proposal, that this was a lot of this was outside of companies' control. So for instance, if the member states didn't make pricing and reimbursement decisions on time, you could, because of this, lose the additional incentives which is tied to that. So this is why and not to mention that you can have a situation that for some medicine for rare diseases in a smaller member state, like Malta, Cyprus, whatever, so very small member states, you don't have patients for that. So there is no motivation on part of the social security system to make the pricing and reimbursement decision on that medicine. So this is why what the parliament proposed is to have a legal obligation. So if there is a need in a member state for a certain medicine, they have to request it, and then the company has to provide it within a certain period of time. We put a maximum 12 months. It can be maybe shorter, etc. This is something that can be negotiated. But I think this kind of approach of the parliament was really of striking the balance of all of these interests, so access on one side, but also stimulating innovation on the other.
Okay, I'm going to do one last question, quick fire round for everybody. Getting out of Brussels for a moment, big debate in Geneva this week at the World Health Organization over a new pandemic agreement. I won't ask you to comment in detail on that, but I just want to ask everybody if you think a key issue there is the EU has been vigorously defending the intellectual property rights of pharma companies, insisting that the licensing and transfer of technology to other countries, other companies during a crisis should be voluntary and on mutually agreed terms. Recalling the experience of the COVID pandemic, should pharma companies have to share their technology protected by intellectual property during a health crisis?
For sure.
For sure.
In certain very, very exceptional circumstances, maybe, but I have to say that we already have a lot of countries which are already exempted from the protection, and this has not really, I think, resulted in faster access. So I don't think that, and this goes also for access in the EU level. I don't think that we can resolve this problem by this instrument. I think there are many other reasons and many other tools and instruments that we should use there.
Janos?
Well, I think a dimension that we haven't highlighted is the role, because you mentioned the pandemic, and there it was clear that the public supported in multiple ways the R&D process. So it is important to factor that into the discussion. And that's also part of the pharma legislation negotiations about the role of the multi-layered public support, because the system in the meantime has changed. It's not that one company valiantly takes all the risks on their shoulders. The system has changed. We know on the contrary, what we should also do in Europe is try to strengthen the SMEs, try to strengthen biotech, because the environment as we see nowadays, most of the R&D that you referred to doesn't even come from the big usual pharmaceutical companies, but it comes from the smaller biotech, and then we have tons of mergers and acquisitions, and of course the litigation cases that I tried also to highlight. Therefore, just to say that the ecosystem has changed, and at the same time, it remains to be seen, and I think MEP Sokol and also Marta Temido highlighted the importance of increasing the public financing, or at least maintaining that Europe will be investing and will be, well, subsidizing, but at the same time setting the norms, because subsidies should come with norm setting.
And
I think there's a misportrayal of the pharma industry. The way I have encountered the pharma industry is that it has made multiple voluntary commitments towards access, towards sharing its intellectual property with low and mid-income countries, voluntary commitments, participating in the access to medicines pool, participating in joint industry initiatives to assure the poorest of the poor have access to patented technology. It is not as if they would just sit on their technology and say, you can never have it. That's completely not how I have encountered the pharma industry. And I think we should start thinking in terms of how to build bridges and how to manage intellectual property in the interest of the public. This is not a black or white debate. This is a debate about a joint vision for the future, a joint vision where the patients have, we all will be patients eventually, sooner or later. But at the same time, we are not taking the carpet out of the business, out of your feet, that you cannot do business anymore. It's about managing IP in the public interest, and they're building up on existing initiatives, like the access to medicines pool or similar ones.
And on that note, I'd like to thank all our panelists for their contributions. We're going to have our closing arguments from our two debaters, but can we get a round of applause for all of our panelists? Thank you.
So much.
Okay, so Yanis, you get to go first this time to deliver your closing arguments in 90 seconds.
Yes, I think there were references already to the geopolitical situation. I think it is important when we talk about Europe's competitiveness and Europe's strategic autonomy that at the same time we pay extra attention to the question of fiscal responsibility. And I'm saying this because also to answer your previous question about the ongoing negotiations in the Council, and of course the negotiations that will also take place on the Critical Medicines Act, etc., it is clear that national budgets, and I'm not referring only to the healthcare systems, are under tremendous strain with lots of competing priorities in Europe. Therefore, we need to be careful not to give blank checks. We need to be careful to invest wisely. We need to be careful to not jeopardize the sustainability, the financial sustainability of the system, because at the end of the day, if we're not fiscally responsible, and if we do not promote, for instance, healthy competition and early entry of generics and biosimilars, then I need to warn the generics and biosimilar sectors, because they will end up footing the bill again. Therefore, we need to be really, really careful and keep in mind always the fiscal responsibility, especially in the ongoing discussions around Europe's competitiveness, growth, and to be careful with where we invest the little public money and the guarantees that we want to offer and the incentives and the flexibilities that we want to offer to all sectors, including, of course, pharmaceuticals. The discussion today was not about abolishing the IP system or not, but it's just about recalibrating the system and making sure that we get to a new social contract, because at the end of the day, if companies are short-sighted and they just want to get the maximum out of the political momentum, then we will end up not in a win-win, but in a lose-lose situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please, MEP Sokol, your closing arguments in 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. So, pharmaceutical sector is one of the strategically most important sectors for the European Union, I would say for any country. We saw that in the Draghi report. We see it now in the trade wars. I think Trump is preparing something very special for the pharmaceutical sector. This shows us how important this is. He also had special meetings only dedicated to the pharma industry, and this shows how important the sector it is. I think food production, pharmaceuticals, and defense spending, so military spending, are the three most important sectors that will be crucial in the decades to come in this global fight, let's say, in this global competition that is getting more and more brutal every day. So we have to look at this in this global context and not as an isolated situation only in Europe. I think if we want to have cheap, accessible medicines that we can pay for, and we all agree on that, we first have to have one. So that's the whole point. So first you need to have an incentive for a private sector to develop new medicine. You need to have a business plan. You need to have business feasibility to develop a new medicine, and to do that we definitely need RDP and intellectual property protection. So just imagine how many medicines would not have been developed if we reduced the protection by 1 or 2 years, etc. So there will be no medicine, and definitely then we could not speak about the generic medicines. I agree we need a balance. I think we have it with the Bolar exemption. Maybe some details it can be improved, but I think this is the balance that we need to strike. On access, there are other instruments in EU that we can use, so we need to change the transparency directive, we need to implement it more, we need to reduce the deadlines for making pricing and reimbursement decisions, we need to improve provisions of cross-border healthcare. So there are different other instruments that we can use to actually make access better, and the EU has the tools to do it.
Thank you very much. So, as Roy very insightfully said earlier, this is not just this is a very complex issue, and it's not just a case of deciding one person is right and one person is wrong. But that is nonetheless precisely what I'm going to ask you to do, and ask you to vote once again for the motion. This House believes that the EU's intellectual property system strikes the right balance between incentives for medicines innovation and patient access. So I think beforehand it was 23% yes and 77% no. You can scan the QR code displayed on the screens, hopefully, or go on Slido with the hashtag PharmaPatentsEU. Vote either for or against the motion, and then we will have a look and we'll compare.
So it's essentially the same. We didn't change much.
Yeah, but it's so it seems there's some movement of a couple of percent. Yanis, it looks like you may have held the line. Congratulations. But thank you both to our debaters for a very convincing performance. Latest figure I'm seeing 78% say no, does not strike the right balance.
27.
So as we were. So listen, it's time to wrap up, but I'd like to say a very big thank you to the audience for joining us in person and tuning in online. Once again to our speakers for joining us on stage, our panelists now off stage, and finally to our partner, Sandoz. Thank you very much for making this event possible. And on a final note, please don't miss Politico's live AI and Tech Summit on April 13th and 14th. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.